With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Tez Zayin. We left off on Daf Tezva of Amid Beis, Mamish, all the way at the bottom line, at the end of the Amid. Just to quickly repeat the flow that we began learning, the Chazal that tell us that Amar Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, that God Almighty tells the Jewish people when it comes to spending money for Shabbos and Yom Tov, Luvu Eilai, borrow money. Aliyah, on my responsibility, says God. And v'kachu kedushas hayom, and make Yom Tov, make Shabbos, any way you want to make it. The more beautiful, the better. And v'ha'aminu bi, and God says, and trust in me. V'ani pareya, I'll see to it that you will be able to repay your debts. I just want to speak out that Yakir pointed out after we finished recording the last year that there is another Chazal that says, Asay Shabbat chochoil v'al tetztarech lebriyos. That the sages tell us that it's better not to receive money from charity, even though it's going to mean that the foods that we will have on Shabbos will be mamish just like a weekday. Better that than taking money from charity. It doesn't contradict at all what we're learning right now, because there's a big difference between taking money from charity versus what we are speaking about, which is borrowing money. Keminig America, borrow money, put it on the credit card. That's something that we advocate to do when it comes to spending money for Shabbos and Yom Tov, and that will lead us into today. We'll begin learning of also a very known saying of our sages that kol mizonos shel adam ketzuvim eloi, that all of the mizonos doesn't only mean mizonos, it means all of our income is predetermined. When on Rosh Hashanah, even though for many people it's not sealed, completed, but it's from Rosh Hashanah until and including Yom Kippur. And once that was predetermined, we can work and work. We will not make 1 cent more, chutz, but there are exceptions. And that is here again, moitzois, Shabbosis, Yom Tovim, the money that people spend on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, the money that people spend educating their children, voitzoas, banav l'talmud Torah, that the more we spend, God is going to see to it that through the same keli that we already have, we're going to make up, we're going to recoup all of those expenditures. That's going to lead us into there's a very famous daf, the difference of approach between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai, whenever he would find something beautiful, beautiful food, good, tasty food, he would save it for Shabbos. And then if he would find something even better, then he would keep the even better for Shabbos and eat up that which he designated for Shabbos. And Hillel had another midah, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, and we'll speak out what that means, that he had such emunah and bitachon that he lived the moment every time. And he worried about right now for right now, with the full confidence that when Shabbos will come, God will provide what he will need for Shabbos at that time. We're going to come back. Other agadatas regarding the virtue of hanoisin matana lachavero. If you give a gift to your fellow, you don't have to notify them that you gave them a gift. The counter value will be, in order to promote achdos amongst the Jewish people and avas reim and avas Yisrael, there are times that we do advocate for one to notify the other. That means if you give me a gift, let me know that you gave me the gift, for me to have a greater amount of appreciation for you. When do we say it? When don't we say it? And we're going to come back to the rules of Eruv Tafshilin. Number one, that the minimum amount of food has to be a kazayis. There's a concept by Eruv Tafshilin that Eruv Tafshilin tzrichim da'as, that there has to be a certain amount of knowledge regarding the establishment of Eruv Tafshilin. We will see soon what that means. Who has to have the das? The one that's placing it or the one for whom it's being placed? And we will learn that everyone agrees that Eruv Tchumin, as we'll speak out again when we'll get there in the Gemara, may not be placed on Yom Tov for Shabbos. You have to place it prior Yom Tov for Shabbos, and no one debates that. The Machlokes Tanaim will be concerning Eruv Chatzeros, as we'll repeat what that means. There's a Machlokes Tanaim if one is allowed to place Eruv Chatzeros on Yom Tov for Shabbos or not, and a lot more. Again, let us start on Daf Tezvav Amid Beis. We left off in the bottom of the Amid. Says the Gemara, this is beautiful, that Tanei Rav Tachlifa Achud Rabbi Noi Chazah. Rav Tachlifa, the one who was the brother of Rabbi Noi Chazah, says, guys, on top of Daf Tez Zayin, here we go. Kol mizonosav shel adam ketzuvim lei. All of the person's income, right, is fixed, it's determined, it's decided by God. When is it decided how much income we will have? from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippurim, as we will learn other statements in the sages about Rosh Hashanah and about how for the Beinani, nothing is completely finalized until Yom Kippur, but it's during this period of the year. And Bahashgacha Pratas, we are learning this Gemara, Tavshin Pei Beis, Mamish during Aseres Yimei Tshuva. Now, by the way, there's a Tosfos. We'll learn about this other times. If that's the case, why do we daven every day for Parnasa? The idea is that we learn in Hasidus that even when something is predetermined and it's gifted to us in a ruchniistic place, for it to make its way down, there's a possibility for it, so to say, for it to get stuck as it materializes. That's the purpose of the daily prayer. Here we're speaking about the predetermination of income that's placed beruchnius. However, all of the expenditures, not only for food, anything that we do in our lives, which will make our Shabbos, our Yom Tov, more beautiful, doesn't matter how much money we spend. All of that will be returned to God, beyond that which was predetermined on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And the expenditures and the money that people spend for teaching their children Torah. One can argue that this indeed goes for all of the tuition that we pay. And I know for sure the schools love this statement because they claim they can charge whatever they want. You have nothing to worry about. You're going to get it back anyway. So they say, and if you're going to cut down, you'll be more conservative. Okay, Beseder, so you have less income. You'll spend less, you'll make less. But if you spend more, then God will add for you. Beautiful. In other words, your profitability will increase and decrease according to how much money you spend. Look inside the top Tosfos, just to appreciating how this is a flow from what we learned on Daf Tes Vav Amid Beis. Says Tosfos Perushri that Harkol Nafka Mikroi Dila'el. Why are we quoting this over here? All of this is learned from the pasuk regarding spending money for Shabbos. Going back to what we learned, borrow on me, where that goes to Shabbos, Shabbos is in Yom Tovim. Now, here we added something else. Where does that come from? Also from the pasuk when it says Chedvas Hashem Himo Uschem. So here Tosfos is teaching that Chedva goes to Torah. So Levu Elai also for Chedvas Hashem, for spending money teaching our children. Let's go back into the Gemara. Where do we find in the pasuk that all of our mezainis is prefixed, determined, lamaila, during the days of Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur? Because it says Tiku, right? A pasuk in Tehillim, Pei Aleph, Tiku b'chaydish shofar b'kesel yom chagenu, blow a shofar. Now, b'chaydish, during the time of the ischatshus of the moon, during the moon's renewal. Then it says b'kesel. Now, b'kesel means at the appointed time for our festival day. That's the pshat of b'kesel. However, the drush of b'kesel is during the time. Kesel means during the holiday in which the moon is b'kesel, during which the moon is hidden. In other words, this is the pasuk that's referring to Rosh Hashanah. Which Yom Tov is the Yom Tov where the moon is covered? All the other Yom Tovim, even Yom Kippur, is already on the 10th. The other Yom Tovim, right, even Shavuos, it's going to be on the 6th, it's going to be on the 7th. It's not going to be on the day of Rosh Chodesh, Pesach, Sukkot. It's in the middle of the month, etc. The only Yom Tov that's on the day that the moon is hidden, which means it's mamish in the beginning of the month, that goes to Rosh Hashanah. So clearly, first of all, you see over here, indeed, the Torah doesn't say on Rosh Hashanah blow the shofar. The Torah says Tiku b'chaydish shofar b'kesel. That's the source that the mitzvah of blowing shofar is on Rosh Hashanah. It says in the next pasuk, these are the words that we say during Kiddush Rosh Hashanah. Right now, the literal pshat of the pasuk is that there is a choik, right? There is a decree for the Yidden and a judgment to the God of Yaakov. Now, choik also comes from mezainis, that this is the day that chok, not choik, comments under the ches, that the determination of mezainis for the Yidden happens on the Yom Tov in which the moon is hidden, which is Rosh Hashanah. And how do we know, says the Gemara, that the word chak means mezoinus? So either there's a pasuk in Vayigash, this is about how when there was the famine and how Yosef, representing Paroi, predetermined for the priests how much they could have, that it says va'achlu es chukam, that those kohanim, these are kohanim for avodah zarah, they ate. Again, there the word chukam goes to mezoinus. There was a famine. How much food was given to them? Va'achlu es chukam asher naslam paroi. And Marzutra Amar Mahache. Here we have another pasuk from Mishlei where it says hatrifeni lechem chuki, feed me my portion of mezoinus. And these are just two sources. That kichoik li Yisrael means that the mezoinus for Yisrael is predetermined on Rosh Hashanah going into Va'ad B'chlal Yom Kippur. Weiter. Now the Gemara says, continuing about the Hoitzah Shabbos and Yom Tovim, it's not just quantitatively how much money you spend, but it's about living for Shabbos and about setting aside that which is the best for Shabbos. And indeed, Tanya, Amru Olav al Shammai Hazakin, that Kol Yomav Hayoichel Chveit Shabbos. Kol Yomav, that means he always ate for Shabbos. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean he ate? He ate on Shabbos for Shabbos. How do you eat on Wednesday for Shabbos? Explains the Gemara. That Matzah Behemano, if he would find an animal that he knew, this would be a nice steak, is Oymar Zula Shabbos. Whenever he found that animal, and furthermore, matzah acheres noimenu, if he found even a greater animal, so then maniach hasashniya v'oichel asar. So then the better one he would leave for Shabbos, and that which was previously set aside for Shabbos, he would eat during the week. And that's the meaning that kol yomov he would eat l'chvayt Shabbos, because he ended up eating Shabbos food the entire week. Now, Aval Hillel Hazakin Mida Acheres Hoisaloi, and as the commentators say that Hillel Hazakin was not saying that what Shammai was doing, he's going to do something even better. But Hillel was saying that there is another way. Zev is Zev. And perhaps Hillel was minded that Shammai's level was even greater. But since Hillel subscribed to the concept of Shekol Maisav L'Shem Shemayim, that all of our actions are done L'Shem Shemayim. Now, there's so many ways of understanding it. Rashi says Shekol Maisav L'Shem Shemayim means that he had bitachon. In other words, when a Yid lives with the consciousness that there's a God in the world, that it's not in the heavens, but my oivishter and hashgacha pratis, so then a person would live, whatever you find now, you'll eat right now. That's what God gave me for right now. For Shabbos, it's an inyan to have the best Seder. God for sure will provide for me on Friday the best for Shabbos. And Shenemet, as it says, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. And Baruch Hashem Yom Yom is living in the moment. I have some foresight. The more betachin you have that God is always with you, the less concerned you will be today about the tomorrow. That was the midah of Hillel. Tanya Nami Hachi, that Beishama Yoimrim, the same concept, that Mechad Shabich L'Shabboseich. I mean, it's from Chad Shabbos, from Sunday, already have in mind Shabbos. And Besil Yoimrim, Baruch Hashem, Yom Yom. Okay, says the Gemara, Omar Rab Chama Bar Chanina, Hanoisen Matana L'Chaveiroi, if you give a gift to your fellow, Tzarech Lo Yediah, you should, Ein Tzarech Lo Yediah. You don't need to notify your friend, the recipient, that you gave him the gift. Now, why would you notify him? Why would you not notify him? The upside of notifying your fellow is because when I know that you gave me a gift, I'm going to have some gratefulness. There's going to be a promotion of Ahavas Reim. And therefore, it's like a chiddush. He's saying you don't have to notify him. Give him the gift and you can stay anonymous. Shenemer, as it says, this is at the end of Parshas Kisisa. After Moshe Rabbeinu achieved atonement from God Almighty, and he came back down with the second set of luchos, so there was a certain beautiful shine that Moshe Rabbeinu initially was not aware of, and that was a gift that God gave him. The fact that he didn't know it is araya that you don't need to be notified. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Meisvei, das kann ich am Mekadoshchem, says in a Beitzah, Again, this is again a pasuk from Parshas Kisisa that Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe matana tova yesh li bebeis genazai. This is regarding Shabbos. I have a tremendous gift in my treasure house, and the name of the gift is Shabbos. V'ani mevakesh litna li Yisrael. So lech v'hoidia oisam. Go and inform them about the amazing gift that I'm about to give them. And mikan Amar Rav Shimon Gamliel hanoisin pas letinik. Because you do have to notify the recipient. So if a person is going to give, let's say, bread to a child, you should notify his mother, because if not, she'll never know that you gave the kid a gift. So do you have to notify? Do you not have to notify? Clarifies the Gemara, like Kashem. Rav Chama's statement that you don't need to notify the recipient is when the gift that you are giving is the avida li'igluye, it will become discovered. It will become known. Like, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu, God didn't tell him that now your face is shining, but he found out about it very quickly. So that's okay. But the Beitzah that we just learned is if you will never find out who your benefactor was, who your benefactor is, there is an inyan not to be modest. No, it's not about being modest. It's you want to promote ahavas reim, so it's good for the recipient to know that someone gave him or her a gift. Hold on, Shabbos? God needed to pre-tell us about the greatness of Shabbos. Don't we know on our own after we taste and keep Shabbos? Shabbos nami matana leviluye. So the Gemara answers that there's different levels to Shabbos. Or let me speak about the words in the Gemara that that the reward for Shabbos, the nachla b'limit sodim of Shabbos, or if we would not know the depths of Shabbos, then you can keep Shabbos. Until today, people can keep Shabbos and they don't fully get it. So they have to know that if we're not getting Shabbos, we gotta work on ourselves. But there is something in Shabbos that is the greatest of gifts. And we have to be notified about the kindness of God and the love that He has, that He gave us Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Amar Mar, Mikan Amar Rav Shimon Gamliel, based on the Beitzah that God told us about, He's giving us the gift of Shabbos, that Hanois and Pas Latinik, Tzarech Le'diel Le'imay. You have to notify the mother. Says the Gemara, how do you notify the mother? There was no texting over there. And it definitely doesn't mean that you have to go to the mother's house to tell her, by the way, I gave your kid, I saw him on the street. Of course not. You have to do something that the mother should know that the child got a gift. What do you do? So here the Gemara gives something that don't do nowadays. It won't be appreciated. But then, shayif le mishcha, and umalale kaichalam, that either you rub oil on the child, or it was very common for everyone, men, women, even children, they would have this blue dye around their eyes. So put some makeup on the kid. So bread you can eat. But when you smear oil on your head, the oil blight on the head doesn't go away that quick. So the mother's going to ask and by the way, putting oil on one's head was like a big thing. That's the way they used to tip the waiter. They used to put oil on his head. Don't do that today either. So the mother's going to say, wow, who put oil on your head? How beautiful. So the kid is going to say, Chaim Yankel, and he also gave me a piece of bread. So that's the way you notify the mother. However, already in the times of Chazal, but nowadays, this is going back 1700 years, 1800 years. Nowadays, then, the Chashen and L'chshafim, that sometimes if one wanted to put a spell, a black magic spell on the other, they would put oil on their head, or they would paint their eyes up with makeup. So the mother would get afraid. You're trying to promote Avas Reim. Here you're going to frighten her. So that's not a good advice. So Amar Papa, what you should do is make sure that some of the crumbs of the bread, you should put it on the kid's shirt. If you're giving the kid coffee, spill some coffee on the shirt. Do something that even if the child will eat up all the food, there'll be some remnant of that food on the child's clothing. And therefore the mother's going to ask the child, wow, I see I have some crumbs of bread. Who gave you the bread? And the child will then notify who did that, and that will promote, again, Ahavas Reim. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Shemai Choy. Yossi Wachtal came in and as an easy Gemara, don't think, this is Loisa, this is the break, this is the Gan Eden piece over here. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Shemai Choy, Kol Mitzvah Shenas Lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, all of the mitzvahs that God Almighty gave us, Nasa Lehem B'Fares, He gave it to us in public. Chutz Mishabes, listen to this, that Shabbos is a gift that God gave us, B'tzina. God gave us Shabbos in private. God gave us Shabbos in private. And where do we find that? Because it says, Beini ubein b'nei Yisrael oisi lo'olam. The pshat lo'olam is that Shabbos is an eternal sign that we are God's people. However, lo'olam is written without a vav. right? The Kri and the Ksiv, and therefore it could be vowelized with a kamatz under the ayin. La'olam means helem, that Shabbos is a gift that's secret. No one knows, it's Beitzah. And this is the hemshich to what we just learned. So first of all, the Gemara says an interesting angle to challenge this. If Shabbos was given to us Beitzah, never mind that it's in the Ten Commandments. That's not the angle the Gemara is going. But Oy Bazoi, in the beginning of Masechtas Avodah Zarah, the Gemara tells us that after Mashiach will come, God Almighty is going to take the nations of the world to task. And he's going to challenge them, why did you not keep the mitzvahs? And one of the things they're going to be also challenged on, why didn't they keep Shabbos? But Oy Bazoi, why will they be punished? Again, that's what Rashi here goes back to the Gemara Avodah Zarah. Rashi says, "Vanon ashkachan shechazar HaKadosh Baruch Hu laha'anishon ala toidav ala mitzvah." Dichsiv v'zorach miseir olamai. I'm reading inside the Rashi. So how can God, they should not be punished because it's Beitzah. They never knew about it. So the Gemara says, no, Shabbos oiduye oidinu. Everyone knows about Shabbos. But like we learned above, there's the external Shabbos that everyone knows that we have to keep, that we keep. But then there's the matan schara, there's the pnimius of Shabbos, that we can call that the schad mitzvah. The machla b'li mitzadim, to make that clear, is not something in some next life. It's in this moment that to really get the concept of Shabbos, we need to do avodah. That's something that's concealed. You have to dig deep for that. And that's something that, so the goyim are going to get punished because they knew about the general Shabbos. What don't they know about? What's la'alam, the pnimius of Shabbos? Even if matan scharanami oidinu, even if everyone knows this inner schar of Shabbos, but the concept of a neshama yeseda, that's something that's la'olam, not la'olam, la'olam. What's the neshama yeseda? Very interesting. Rashi Chevra says Rashi roichav leiv, that there's a certain broadening of our heart, which enables us to rest better and to have greater simcha. Rashi. And liyos, and that also expresses itself even begashmius, that we become pasuach l'revacha, we become broader, greater people, meaning that we can eat more and drink more, and it doesn't overwhelm us. Ve'ein nafshay katsa olav, gevaldik. So the neshama yeseda even affects our capacity, begashmius, of being bigger, of being greater, and that's something that is la'olam. Now, by the way, the Marsha has an opposite approach of Rashi. He says, "Faket goysha shavas chayiv misa." Goysha shavas chayiv misa. But how can we punish them with misa if they never even know that they can't keep Shabbos? So that's the Gemara in the opposite angle. No, they know about Shabbos, and the chitzonius of Shabbos, which is simply not to do malach, is something that they may not partake in, because the world was created to work. We don't work on Shabbos because God gave us an exemption. If you don't have an exemption, Goysha Shabbos is chayiv misa. But here again, that's the chitzonius of Shabbos, which is simply stopping to work. But there's something deeper in Shabbos which is concealed that we have to work more to experience. And the Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish, neshama yiseda noisin HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'adam erev Shabbos. Ulamotzoi Shabbos noitin noisei emenu. Shenemar, as it says, Shavas vayinafa. Shavas means Hashem stopped creating, and he rested. And here we have the drush that when it's Shabbos, not Shabbos, Shabbos, Vayi Nafash is a composite, it's a compilation of these words. Vai oivei, of the nefesh. Oh my God, I'm losing my soul. And by the way, that's the source for us smelling psamim, because the chush of reyach is the closest to the neshama, and to console the neshama that remains on the loss of this higher level of neshama, we give it abyssal shmekach psamim on Matzoi Shabbos. And atkan chevra, the agadata, and now we're going to come back. Now we're coming back to the dinim of Eruv Tavshil. We learned in the Mishnah that oisa adam tavshil me'erev yomtiv, that a person should prepare erev yomtiv, a cooked dish, and that is what we call the Eruv Tavshilin, because since you cook it erev yomtiv, now on Friday, when you prepare for Shabbos, we view your prep for Shabbos as a merging with, as mu'urav. It's a hemshich from that which you began before Shabbos. And therefore, we have to remember Rav and Havashi, Kvod Shabbos, Kvod Yom Tov. That's important to remember that. Either way, the Eruv Tavshilin is gonna add to covered Shabbos, and it's gonna add to covered Yom Tov. Says Abaye. So Amar Abaye that lo yishanu ela tafshel. Avol pas loy upa. Bread may not be used. I want to give everyone a heads up that we're gonna paskin, and we're gonna learn this together over the next few daf. That actually an 8 of tafshilin should be at least one tafshil and bread or matzah. We use pas, but wait, let's begin the sugya. Abaye says the Mishnah says tafshil dafke, something that's cooked and not something that's baked, not bread. Now we want to understand farvos nish. Because you need something that you eat with bread, not something as staple as pashut as common as. Upas loy melafta. Bread is not a accompaniment. Bread is, the staple. And why would that be? So you want to make sure that what you prepared is something special. So either if it's too commonly eaten, it's not special, right? Or it's not a distinguishable Shabbos food. Similar. So if that's the pshat, for how daisa, we just learned about daisa 2 daf ago. This is an oatmeal cereal in which the grains were pounded not 4 times, but only 2 times. Daisa is also not something that you should eat with bread. And therefore, it's again, and if the criterion is that which you use for 8 of tafshilin has to be something that's a accompaniment to bread. In the times of Chazal, everything was eaten with bread. Bread was like the ikar, so even steak was eaten with bread. The Amar Rab Zayda tells us regarding his observation that people in Bavel, they would eat oatmeal, they would eat daisa with bread, and he would laugh at them. Hani Bavloi Tipshoy, these foolish Babylonians, that the Achlin Hama ben Hama, so they eat bread with bread. You don't eat bread with bread because daisa, oatmeal, is bread. It's made out of the 5 grains. Yet, that what and if Abaye is correct, if you don't use bread, why are you allowed to use daisa for 8 of tafshilin? So the Gemara says, Elam, Abaye is correct, but mida de lo shchiach bo'inon. It's about something that people will know it was especially designated for Shabbos. So it's about more common or less common. Pas is more common, the most common. That's not good for 8 of tafshilin. But daisa, it's not distinguishable. It's not an accompaniment. Still, it's less shchicha than pas, and it suffices for you to use it for an 8 of tafshilin. Now, there's another version of the whole thing. Ikada Amri Abaye says, Lo shanu ela tafshil avol pas loy. So far, so good. So far, it's the same. And on that, the Gemara asked, Ilema, right? What's the reason? Ilema mida de lo shchiach ve'inon. If the reason why Abaye does not allow us to use pas is because we don't want to use something that's common, and pas is shchiach. If that's the case, daisa is not shchicha. And here we have another version that for Amar Rav Mechumi bar Zechariah Mishmei Abaye that ein ma'arvin b'daisa, the opposite of before. So the Gemara says ela mila de malapes be'inan. According to this version, it's not enough for something to be less common. You have to have something that is considered a accompaniment to bread, something that's very distant from staple. And therefore, pas loy melafta and daisa nami loy melafta. If it's not something that is like chashuv enough, distinguishable enough that you eat it together with bread, and as again, we're going to quote the same statement that don't eat oatmeal with bread, you're eating bread with bread. So it has to be something even more chashuv for Kavod Shabbos and Kavod Yom Tov. Right? To Amar Rab Zayda, Hani Bavloi Tivshoy, Achlin Hama ben Hama. Says the Gemara, right? Tani Rab Chia. Adoshim shebe shulei kedeira. When you cook, the example is always this beans or other types of vegetables in a pot. Some of it gets stuck to the bottom of the pot. They didn't have Teflon. I don't know if they used enough oil, whatever it was. The question is, what happens if you have leftover food it wasn't made lechatchila for the Eid of Tavshilin, but now Erev Yom Tov, you want to take this leftover food and designate it for the Eid of Tavshilin. So we just learned that it has to be something either that's at least less common. The other version was even more important. It should be something distinguishable. We're not debating that. Yes, but it doesn't mean that the Eid of Tavshilin has to be something that you made for the Eid of Tavshilin. You have to designate it. It doesn't happen by itself. But even if you made food, let's say by us, that we have 2 days Yom Tov, so we make an Eid of Tavshilin Wednesday afternoon. That's the way it is because Thursday, Friday is Shabbos. You made food Wednesday for Wednesday. Now you have in the Shulei Hakadeda, you have on the bottom of the pot, you have something that adhered. You didn't even take it out because you didn't want to have to scrape it out. Doesn't matter. If you will now remove that from the bottom of the pot and say, this will be my Eid of Tavshilin, that's fine. That's good. Adoshim shebeshulei hakdeira, even, lentils, soymech, aliyah, mishum, that's Kavan's picture. But there by Kavan, it looks too pretty. It means even if it's stuck to the bottom of the pot, that you can rely on it for the Eid of Tavshilin. What's important is you have to designate it. Doesn't mean that it's just in the bottom of your pot. But there's a big chiddush here, is that you didn't need to make it lachatchila for the Eid of Tavshilin. Hanamili, however, that we have to adhere to the minimum amount. And we're going to learn a lot about the minimum amount. And the minimum amount of the Eid of Tavshilin is a kezayis. Similar. That shamnuni is
Rabbi,
yes.
Does this mean that you don't have to separate out? Meaning you could just have a pot of food that you're using for your Yom Tov meal, and just you say, hey, the bottom part will be kept as my Erev?
No.
You have to split it out before Yom Tov.
You have to separate it because we learned in the Mishnah that if someone eats up the Eid of Tavshilin before they finish preparing the Shabbos food, then they can't rely on it. This only means is that on one hand, it has to be something not so common, perhaps even distinguishable. Mida de malapes. Lentils was something that was eaten with bread. Lentils are fine. But don't think you have to make this for the Eid of Tavshilin. It can be the least important lentils that you had on Wednesday, the ones that stayed in the bottom of the pot. But when you remove it, you have to remove it, separate it, and declare the Eid of Tavshilin, then it's good enough. Same thing here also. If you have fats that are in the knife, shamnunias, chashuv fats, then the fatter, the better, then it's a whole different culture. Fine, even though it's like the leftovers, as long as you can scrape off your knife the remaining fats from the meat that you had on Wednesday or the meats that you had on Tuesday, you're good, as long as you have the minimum amount. So, and here again, when the isbuhu kizayis. Says the Gemara, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rav. This is going to be a beautiful halach. Dogim ketanim meluchim. Small fish, that salting it makes it edible. Now, nowadays, there's a new minhag, garnished raw meat. They convinced us that raw meat is sushi and but then everything needed to be prepared. So he says that if you salted small fish, since it's edible as is, even if a non-Jew now is going to go ahead and cook it, and this is going quickly, we're touching the topic of bishul akum, that something that a goy cooked for us may not be eaten on a rabbinic level, but one of the exceptions to the rule is chevre, is that if it was already edible prior to the goy's cooking, even though he cooked it, you're good. Since fish that were slightly salted are considered edible, even though he made it better, he cooked it. But ein bohem mishum bishul inachim. However, now there's a beautiful novelty over here. Guys, we are learning the sugya of Eid of Tavshilin. You have to cook something. The Eid of Tavshilin has to be a cooked item. So if we're saying that as far as the dinim of bishul akum is concerned, the goy's cooking it is insignificant. Salted fish that was not cooked cannot be used for Eid of Tavshilin because it's not a tafshil, it's not something that's cooked. So we say, like in many other areas of halacha, that it doesn't travel on the same track. For bishul akum, it's not considered cooked. Doesn't bother us that it's cooked. But on the other hand, this is great. But now if the guy is going to roast it, and now you have this roasted small fish, yes, you appreciate this, even though people can argue it contradicts each other. In other words, the salted fish is not good for Eid of Tavshilin. Cooking it is what made it chashuv enough for Eid of Tavshilin. So you would argue, well, if you can use it for Eid of Tavshilin, then it should by default be asur because of bishul akum. No. For bishul akum, we say if it was edible prior to the guy's cooking, there's no issue with the fact that the guy cooked it. And yes, it's a cooked item, and you could use this, even though it was cooked by a guy, for Eid of Tavshilin.
I mean, the point is that it was edible before the guy cooked it.
That's correct.
So it's like nechel chai or something like that.
Nechel chai. Correct. And nechel chai, no, it's salted fish is not good for Eid of Tavshilin. So the cooking it, upgraded it. Nevertheless, it's not going to be also because of bishul akum. However, speaking about a guy preparing food for you, if he took this fish, even if it was already salted before, but he made the harsana dish, which is that they would take fish fats, and here what's important is, and they would add flour, and they would fry it. Here already, it's also not for. We're speaking about bishul akum. Why? Because the flour part was inedible, was unedible, was not edible prior to the guy's cooking. So his cooking here made it consumable. Now we got a problem with bishul akum. Pshita. What's even the chiddush in that? So Mao the MERCAVA daf tezayin Amid Bey says the Gemara that you would think that how do you view this dish? Fish and flour. That if we're going to say that the fish is considered the dominant harsana ikar, when it comes to making brachas, you make one bracha on the ikar. So maybe the fish is the ikar, and the fish that was salted, and we just learned that if a guy cooks slightly salted fish that was already edible, there's no bishul akum. So I don't care if you're making this together with flour. Who cares? View the flour as the lesser significant part, and therefore it should still be permissible. So the Kamash Malan, that we view the kemach as the ikar, which is why now that the guy cooked it, yes, it's also because of bishul akum. Let's get moving. Okay. As we learned above, and we already quoted this, that Eruve Tavshilin needs to have the minimum amount of a kazayis. And by the way, Rav Abba is not saying that a kazayis is the best. No, the best is what we do nowadays. Take a proper chashava slice of fish. Take a proper chashava slice of meat. Which we're not looking, but the minimum kazayis is enough. Okay. Elyahu, Eid of Tavshilin is being placed for many people. This is such a practical sugya. Kazayis echad lekulam, oidilma kazayis lechol echad ve'echad. The Rishonim explain we're not speaking about in one household that can I know how to, let's say there's 6 kids, that there has to be a kazayis for every member. No, it means that as we will learn, one Eid of Tavshilin could be made for various households. So yeah, one kazayis for one household, but if I know that I'm making an Eid of Tavshilin for me and for you and for the other neighbor, so maybe you should eat a kazayis for each one or not. So Tashema, all right, the Amar Rab Abba Amar Rav, that Eruve Tavshilin Srichim Kazayis, Mamish, right? We just quoted the Rab Abba, but it's really in the name of Rab. And when he quoted Rav, he added Bein La'echad, Bein La'meya, clearly, even if it's being made for 100 households, only one kazayis is needed for all. Check the Gemara. Hold on. You're telling me, Rab Abba, in the name of Rav, that one kazayis is needed. We learned in our Mishnah that Achol Yosha Avad, if the Eid of Tavshilin was eaten or lost prior to you finishing preparing the food for Shabbos. So the Mishnah says the same concept that Lo Yivashel Olav Atchila, you can't now rely on it to cook food for Shabbos. Just stop a second. The word batchila means, because we learned in the Mishnah, that if a person did not make an Eid of Tavshilin, and no harama is allowed, you're not going to trick the system, but you made food for Yom Tov, really you made it for Yom Tov. If you have leftovers, then you can use it for Shabbos. The pshat of Eid of Tavshilin is we're creating a mechanism which will allow us batchila or lechatchila to bake and to cook food for Shabbos on Yom Tov. But shiur mimenu kolshu, the Mishnah says, but if only a little bit of the Eid of Tavshilin remained, in other words, some of it was eaten, some of it was lost. Kolshu normally means a minimum amount. Then soymech olav l'Shabbos. And l'choyre argues the Gemara correctly. Kashan Abba, Kashan Av, my kolshu lav afal gav, that even if there's no kazayis, it's a kolshu. So the Gemara says no, that's not a kasha. That in our case, The kolshu means the izbei kazayis, and again, it fits with what the Rishonim speak out, because when Abba says that an Eruv Tavshilin needs to have a kazayis, it doesn't mean, he was not saying that the kazayis is amazing. He's saying kazayis is minimum amount. L'chatchila, you're supposed to have a chaticha that's a chavadika slice of fish, of meat. So in the context of, it's really better for you to have a proper slice of meat. If you have a kolshu, means a kazayis, then it's still good enough. Weiter. We're trying to refute this kazayis shit. Tashema, now comes the kasha from a Beitzah. It says in the Beitzah, tafshil ze soli, that when you have to have a tafshil, it doesn't mean dafka something that's cooked. It can mean something that's roasted. It can mean something that's kavush. Kavush means something that's pickled. They used to pickle things in vinegar or whatever. Shaluk, something that's very cooked or something that's ordinarily cooked. All that could be used for the Eruv Tafshilin food. Now another detail says the Beitzah that kulyas ho ispanim. Kulyas ho ispanim is some sort of Spanish tender salted fish. It's like a hush of a dish. Here again. So normally it was salted. People maybe ate it as it's salted. But if you cook it, here again, even though it was already edible prior to it being cooked, it's good. And listen to the words. How much has no limit? And if you set an amount and then it was lost or eaten, even though there's less of it left, ein loy shiur, again is mashma, that even if you have just a mashu, just a drop, you're also good. And my love, ein loy shiur klal. Soifoi ein loy shiur means even less than a kazayis. And here again, the Gemara says, no, that's not the meaning of the Beitzah. Indeed, ein loy shiur lamayla, that when you set aside the Eruv Tavshilin, there isn't a max limit. You can set aside as much, you can't say the more, the better, but there's no limit. Set aside one piece, set aside two pieces, set aside the whole steak, set aside 10 steaks, that's fine. When it says that soifoi ein leishir, avayesh leishir lamata, because if it was eaten or lost, yes, we stand our ground that you have to have at least a kazayis. And if there's less than a kazayis, then you may not rely on it lachatchila to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Says the Gemara, another statement here, in the name of Rav, Eruv Tavshilin Sirichin Das. Well, you have to have Das. Now, what do you have to have Das? So we have the words here in the Gemara. There's the Maniach and there's the Mishehi Nichuloi. There's the one that's placing the Eruv Tavshilin. He for sure has to have Das. You have to designate the food, and with your das, and say this is for Eruv Tavshilin. So the Gemara explains, Pshita das maniach be'inon. We don't need Rav Huna to come and say that the one who's placing it, right, has to have das, knowledge and intent. Das misheni choloi be'inon. Or maybe that's the do you also have to have the intention of the person or the household for whom it's being placed? Maybe Rab is just telling you that you have to have the das of the maniach. Does the person for whom it was being placed also have to know or not? So Tashema, and here we go. Davua the Shmuel, when he would place the Eruv in the city of Nardo, Ma'arev Akula Nardo, he would actually place it. Guys, we do this today for the whole city. Similarly, Rav Ami and Abasi that lived in Tveria, when they would make in their homes in Eruv Tavshilin, they would do it Akulu Tveria. Similarly, 3, Machlis, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, he would make the following announcement when? Not before Yom Tov. That's key. He would make this announcement, Dafka on Yom Tov, that Nishalei Niech Eruv Tavshilin, after the fact, Yovevi Yismach Alai. And according to many of the Shonim, the Iker proof was from Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. In other words, he would announce it on Yom Tov, prior to Yom Tov, not like the father of Shmuel that everyone knew he's doing it for the whole city, or like the residents in Tveria, they knew Rav Ami and Avasi has to be covered. Here, by this Rabbi Yaakov, it wasn't that known. Nevertheless, l'choira, after the fact, it's going to be good. So that's it. So that's a raya that what all Rav Huna was saying is that you need to have the das of the maniach for whom? For whom? That's very good. In other words, if you want to designate the Eruv Tavshilin for everyone in your city, you have to have in mind everyone in the city. And by the way, that's what we do nowadays. Nowadays, when we make an Eruv Tavshilin, before you make the bracha, you give it to someone who has the power to acquire it for everyone here in the city. And Zachan Adam Shalei B'fanav, perfectly fine, even though no one knows that someone on their behalf made a kinyan of the Eruv. Then you give it back to the Maniach, who then makes the bracha and declares that it's for everyone in the city. Because you don't need to have the das for the person for whom you're giving it, for whom you're placing it. But the one who's making it can't just make it for himself and it's going to work for other people. He has to have in mind for everyone for whom he's making it. Now, va'at kama means, so how about having one Yid in Yerushalayim to make it for the whole world? He made it, Rav Amein Abbas, he made it for Tiberia. Why not also for Tzfas? Because it doesn't go that way. It's only for people in your city. And how far in your city? So, va'at kama, ad techum Shabbos. Now, Rashi says something very strong. What's the magic of Tchum Shabbos? Why can't he place it for people that live beyond the Tchum Shabbos? Says Rashi that because for people that live outside your city, the way Rashi makes it sound that theoretically you can place it for people in another city. It's just like we presume that if you live in your city, you're thinking about your locals. It didn't go on your heart to remember people that live out there. Right, mashma from Rashi. If you know that you had in mind, I know I have a cousin and he lives over there in the next village, and this guy forgets to make an Eruv Tavshilin, and I'm having him in mind, maybe it works. It's not that it cannot work. It's just that we presume that you did not have intent and tzrichem das. So only the maniach, but the maniach has to have in mind for everyone for whom he's making the Eruv. Let's go weiter. More about one person making an Eruv for another. You had this blind person that had this genius memory to have a Masad Shmuel. He was the one that in the yeshiva of Shmuel, he was the one that reviewed all the Torah Shabbat Peh by heart. So he was an asset to have in the base Midrash. And Chazia the Havei Otzif. And this Shmuel saw that this Samya, this Beitzah teacher, was Bisl Morosh Chayredik on Yom Tov. And Omerlei, Amayatzivat, why are you sad? And he Omerlei, to which the Samya responded, Deloy Oisivi Eruv Tavshilin. I forgot to establish for myself an Eruv Tavshilin. And this was on Yom Tov. And therefore, basically, I cannot properly prepare food for Shabbos. Omerlei. Now, if there would be no solution, what would Shmuel tell him? Don't be depressed. Come eat by me. There was no need to say that. Here, Shmuel told him, Smoich Adidi, just like Shmuel's father. He placed it for Nardo. Shmuel had in mind for everyone in the city. Oh, but now the Gemara is going to tell us through the story that that's only a bidi evet. That should not be. That may not be a lachatchila. And what happened was Lashana. The next year, the next Yom Tov, again, there was a time that Chazia the Hava Otziv, it was the next Yom Tov, that Shmuel saw that this Samya was sad, and Omerlei again, Amayat Tzivat, and here the same answer, he tells him it was Yom Tov of Shabbos, that the Lo Yisiv Eruv Tavshilin, I forgot to establish the Eruv Tavshilin, and Omerlei, Oibazoi, Poisheyaat, you're Poisheya. That means you purposefully did not place it. Lokula Al Mashari, I had in mind everyone who lives in the city, but that they're not poishin. Lididach, for you, no aser. So in other words, the Gemara is telling us, people that forget once, forgetting something once doesn't mean that for you it was not important. Could be, it was very important, you forgot. If you forget something twice, I don't care how you word it. It means it wasn't important for you. And that's called the Yoropasheya and Eruv Tavshilin. You can argue, no, he didn't place it because he was relying on Shmuel. Me relying on yours is a bidi evet. The Chachamim wanted for every household to place an Eruv Tavshilin. Now again, until nowadays, we mamish in the Nusach, we do it for the whole city. That's for the one person or for the people that forgot one time. For that, it's good. But it may not be used as an instrument for, why do I have to make it when you're going to make it? If everyone is going to think that way, at the end, no one is going to make it. Tanach we learned in a Beitzah. Yom Tov Shchal Liyas Be'erev Shabbos. Now we're going me'inyan le'inyan from Eruv Tavshilin. Now we're going to quickly chazer a few dinim of Eruv Tchumen and Eruv Chatzeros. Eruv Tchumen means that midarabanan, one may not walk beyond one's Shabbos residence 2,000 amas in either direction. When we speak about a Shabbos residence, so we learn Masechtas Eruvin, it doesn't mean from your home. If your home is in a city, you only start counting or measuring the 2,000 amas when you leave the Ibura Shel Ir, however you measure that, right? First you have like the 70 amas, whatever the cheshbonos are, there is a limit how far we can walk on Shabbos. So let's say if I'm taking in Shabbos over here, and I would like to hear a drasha that's happening 3,000 amas to my right to the east. So beautiful place in Eruv Tchumen, and it's considered that I am where my food is. It's as if it is halachically I was koina my shvisa with my food, and I count the 2,000 amas from my food, which will allow me to go to my food and from my food to that city. There's a concept of placing a Eruv Tchumen, which is very helpful in these scenarios. An Eruv Tchumen has to be placed, like we learned in Masechtas Eruvin, prior to Yom Tov, prior to Shabbos. It has to be there during Bein HaShmoshes. That was that whole sugya. Is it koine shvisa in the beginning of Bein HaShmoshes, at the end of Bein HaShmoshes? But you got to do it prior to. What happens if I want to have an Eruv Tchumen for Shabbos, because I want to be able to walk 3,000 amas on Shabbos, but I didn't place it out of Yom Tov for Shabbos, which is what I should have done. Now it's already Yom Tov. Now it's already Friday. Guys, don't forget that on Yom Tov I can carry. There's no problem bringing the food to that location. The question is acquiring. It's like a kinyan. I'm acquiring that location as far as these rules are concerned. Are you allowed to do it on Yom Tov for Shabbos? So says the Gemara. Let's begin with the number one. Yom Tov shechal liyas be'erev Shabbos ein ma'arvin lo yeruv tchumen. You may not place an eruv tchumen. So you're bound with your physical location. And now another din, what's Eruv Chatzeros is that even though Midoy Raisa, you are allowed to carry from one Rishus HaYachid to any other Rishus HaYachid, but Midrabanan, beginning with Shlomo HaMelech, if you have Rishuyos HaYachid that are owned by different people, the classical example will be the way people would live in the times of Chazal is that we had homes that opened up to a common Chatzer. The Chatzeros were in front of the houses. So the house belongs only to me, even though I also have ownership in the yard, but so does you. So do you. So it's not the same ownership. This is only mine, and this is also mine, but also yours. And the way to, and therefore, you may not carry from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid. What's the solution? Making an Eruv Chatzeros, which will halachically make it viewed that my house also belongs to everyone in the Chatzar. So everyone owns everything. It's like we are partners in everything. And again, an Eruv Chatzeros should be placed before Shabbos. I forgot, but it's Yom Tov. It's not Shabbos yet. Says the Tanach, you also may not place a Eruv Chatzeros on Friday, Yom Tov, which is Erev Shabbos. Yom Tov cannot be used neither for an Eruv Chatzeros nor for an Eruv Tchumen. However, Rabbi Omer, and as we'll see in a moment, there are really two different versions in Rebbe, but this is the first version of Rebbe, that Ma'arav and Eruv Chatzeros, and Eruv Chatzeros, yes, may be placed on Yom Tov for Shabbos, and for Yom Tov you don't need it. You can carry on Yom Tov. But he's moed to the Tanach that an Eruv Tchumen may not be placed. Now, why does Rebbe differentiate between Eruv Chatzeros and Eruv Tchumen? So he has a beautiful logic. You're trying to prohibit. You can't do it on Yom Tov. Now, when it comes to Eruv Tchumen, just like we may not walk beyond 2,000 amas on Shabbos, we may not walk beyond 2,000 amas on Yom Tov. So it makes sense that since on Yom Tov I'm prohibited to go beyond the Tchum, so the Eruv Tchumen is theoretically needed also for Yom Tov, because of the prohibition of going beyond. So rectifying something that is problematic for me right now is called an act of rectification. Let's learn it that way. And we may not do an act of tikkun on Yom Tov, which is why you can't do it. Now let's think about Eruvei Chatzeros. Eruvei Chatzeros is not Yom Tov related. I am allowed to carry from my home to the public domain on Yom Tov. That's we had that the Mishnah basically says. So since on Yom Tov, I don't even need an Eruvei Chatzeros. So what I'm doing right now, you're going to tell me you're not allowed to do it because you're being misaken. I am not being misaken anything for right now. Nothing is broken right now. I have no limitations right now. Yes, I'm doing an Eruvei Chatzeros right now, which will preempt me being allowed to continue to carry when I go into Shabbos. But since it's not needed for now, it's gavaldik. So Rebbe says it's not called an act of tikkun. And the only reason why one may not place these eruvim is because you can't do something that's considered a tikkun. It's not called tikkun. That's an interesting way of looking at things. And the Tanakama obviously disagrees. They hold that even though that you don't need it for now, but since you need it for later, what you're doing now is a tikkun for later. Which is Eruvei Chatzeros. Now, Itmar, Rav says, Halacha Tanakama. And our version in the Tanakama here is that both Eruv Chatzeros and Eruvei Tchumen are prohibited. And Shmuel says, Halacha Rebbe. Again, according to our version, Rebbe was the lenient one. Everyone agrees that Eruvei Tchumen may not be placed on Yom Tov for Shabbos, but Eruvei Chatzeros may be placed. Right? Hold on. When Shmuel says halachi kerebi, did he mean lakula or lachumra? Now this doesn't make sense. Rebbe was lakula. So asks the Gemara, what are you crying? Pshita the lakula ka'amar. Someone says, no. There was another version of the Tanakam and Rebbe. Mishum d'shalach Rabbi Elazar l'goyla. That loy kisha'atam shenim b'bavel. That what? Rebbe was the matir and the chachamim are oisrim, which is the version that we just learned. But you should know, Ella, that there's a correct version of the Braisa, that Rebbe was the machmer and the chachamim were the ones that at least permit the Eruvei Chatzeros. So now that we have Shmuel paskening like Rebbe, now we have to clarify according to what version of Rebbe. So Tashema, that after Chlifa bar Avdimi, Avaruv the Kavasi the Shmuel, he became a Rav. He became a ordained rabbi, and the first shaila that came to him was regarding the placement of Eruvei Chatzeros on the Yom Tov Erev Shabbos, placing it for Shabbos. He paskin like Shmuel, and when Rav heard his psak din, he says, "Wow, this person got rabbinic ordination, and the first thing that he paskin was wrong. He did a damage. It was harmful." Now, hold on. If you're going to say the way we learned that Shmuel paskined like our version of Rebbe, which is Lekula, in other words, he paskined like his teacher. He says you can place an Eruvei Chatzeros. But Rav, who disagreed, Rav holds Lechumra, that's the Kilkula. You place something that you were not allowed to place. Someone violated this rabbinic rule of he placed something that he should not have. But if you're going to say that the Rav and Shmuel's halachic chachamim, halachic Rebbe is going to follow the version that they had in Eretz Yisrael, which would mean that Shmuel is the machmer, and his student now went ahead, right? That Rav Chlifa bar Avdimi did like Shmuel, which means he told the Jew, you may not place it. So, okay, Rav is going to criticize him, but how can he say that he made an act of kilkul? What was he mekalkal? All that he didn't place the Eruvei Chatzeros. And the Gemara gives a very important answer. Don't think that when the rabbi paskins lechumra, he's not doing an act of kilkul if he should not have been machmer. Because it says the Gemara, that's no proof. Kivin, the mekalkal about rabbim. In other words, if you told a Yid that you cannot place an Eruv Chatzeros, you know what may happen? They're not going to place the Eruv Chatzeros, and the people there are going to end up carrying anyways. So that's also being overly high, no kilkula chavra, daf yud zayin on top of the amid. That's That's the pshat of being mekalkel. Never be machmer if there's no need to, because then people, because of that, you can't do that, they're going to end up doing something even worse. Says the Gemara that Amar Rava, Amar Abchiz, Amar Afuna, that halacha is like Rebbe. However, which version of Rebbe here, the version that they had Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, that he says that not only may Eruve Techumen not be placed, but an Eruve Chatzeres Takem also may not be placed on Yom Tov, that is Erev Shabbos. We'll stop over here, God willing, to be continued.
Rabbi, is there nefesh yisera on Yom Tov?
So by the fact, speaking that we don't smell the psamim, if you want to use that as a link, then certainly not on the same level. Certainly not on the same level. Okay. All right. Here we go, Chevra. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Yud Zayin. We left off on Daf Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amud. We're going to first speak about a scenario where Yom Tov and Shabbos are together. Until now, we were learning about Yom Tov that is prior to Shabbos. When Yom Tov falls on Shabbos, there is one question that expresses itself in many halachic questions. The one root question is, how do we view that day? And here are the 2 options. Option number 1 is that there's Shabbos, there's Yom Tov, 2 different Kedushos. It happens to be that they are being celebrated on the same day, but we're celebrating 2 separate things. Or when Shabbos and Yom Tov fall together, they merge and they become one holy day. Shabbos Yom Tov. It's one Kedusha. We had these Lashonas before regarding the 2 days Yom Tov, regarding the 2 days Rosh Hashanah. And we're going to see how this question of, again, is it 2 separate Kedushos? It happens to be happening at the same time, but it's 2 separate things. Or when it's Shabbos Yom Tov, they merge and it's Shabbos Yom Tov. So one example will be that what's the nusach? How do we say the Shemona Esrei? B'chlal, during the week we have 18, now 19 brachas. Shabbos and Yom Tov we only have 7 brachas. The first 3, the last 3 are always the same, but there is the middle bracha. So the question is, on Shabbos Yom Tov, is there only one middle bracha, making the total numbers of blessings of the Shemona Esrei 7? It's Shabbos and Yom Tov. Mention Shabbos and Yom Tov together, or do you make 8 brachas? 1 bracha for Shabbos, 1 bracha for Yom Tov, because it's like 2 kedushas. And there are many other expressions in halacha where this question of is it 1 kedusha or 2 kedushas will have a practical consequence. Now that we're going to be speaking a little bit about Shabbos and Yom Tov, so we know that we add Yalav Yavai, and the question will be, do we add Yalav Yavai in the Ritzei prayer, also known as the Avodah prayer, which is what we do, and it's a machlekes tanoim, or do we add Yalav Yavai as we do the Al Hanisim in the bracha of Hoida'a, or we can call Moedim. And while we learn it, we'll explain Al Pi Chasidus the huge difference between Ritzei and between Moedim, which will be the underlying machlekes of these tanoim. Now the question will be, when you have a 2-day Yom Tov, which is common in Chutz La'aretz, so it's Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos, and a person remembers on the first day Yom Tov, which is on Thursday, that they forgot to make an Eruv Tafshilin, or that they forgot to make an Eruv Chatzeros. And we just learned, my friends, the top of the Amid, that we paskin like the version of Rebbe L'chumra, that you may not place an Eruv Chatzeros on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Well, that's when Yom Tov is Friday. What happens if you are remembering on Thursday that's Yom Tov? And we'll see why that might make a huge difference. Is there a way to make as Amiman of Shach Eruv? Let's not forget that 2 days Yom Tov is really not biblical. 2 days Yom Tov, 1 day is and 1 day is not. At least it began that way. And that might be a way of, yes, being able to establish an Eruv Tafshilin and or an Eruv Chatzeros. We're going to learn a lot about preparing from 1 day Yom Tov to the next day Yom Tov. Again, up until now, we were learning about preparing from Yom Tov to Shabbos. What about from the first day Yom Tov to the second day Yom Tov? We're going to learn more about people that forgot to make an Eruv Tafshilin. We're going to learn about the concept of ha'arama. Ha'arama is like as a subterfuge, a way of you're making a legal loophole. And there are certain times that Chazal felt that a person bemazed violating a rabbinic rule is better than making a ha'arama. I know that sometimes we make haramas, but we'll learn a scenario where they felt if you're trying like to trick the system, we're going to penalize you even more than if you would have just purposefully violated the rabbinic. We're going to finally come back to our Mishnah in the beginning regarding the machlekes Bishamai and Bisilol. How many cooked dishes do you need to have for the Eid of Tafshilin? In the Mishnah, we learned that Bishamai said 2, Bisilol said 1. We're going to have another version of that machlekes. And as the sugya will unfold, it will become clear that even though we only spoke about a cooked dish, and even though we learned in the last daf that bread cannot be used for the Eid of Tafshilin to allow you to prepare cooked dishes, but actually we're going to learn the Tosfos that we paskin that an Eid of Tafshilin must consist of a cooked dish and of a baked food. Michallah can be a matzah. Basically, any type of food that you plan to prepare for Shabbos, you need to have from that type in your Eid of Tafshilin. If you only want to cook food for Shabbos, if you don't plan to bake food for Shabbos, then you don't have to have a pas. But if you plan on Yom Tov, Friday Yom Tov, to prepare both cooked dishes and to prepare baked items, then you have to have in your Eid of Tafshilin both cooked and baked. And actually, there's another type of food preparation known as hatmana. We're going to learn about that on Daf Chav Beis, but we'll see how that also touches upon the Eid of Tafshilin. Now, if we'll have time in today's Daf and Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis at the end, we're going to learn the second. We're going to start a new Mishnah, and the Mishnah is going to be in the opposite case. What happens when Yom Tov is on Sunday? Up until now, we're learning Yom Tov Friday or Yom Tov Thursday Friday. A lot of that in today's Daf. What happens if Yom Tov is going to be on Sunday? And therefore, what will be the question? Are there any things that we can do on Shabbos for Yom Tov? For example, we'll begin with going to the mikvah. There's an inyan to go to the mikvah prior to Yom Tov. Can you go to the mikvah on Shabbos? Or if you have a utensil that's impure, that's tamei, can you take it to the mikvah on Shabbos for Yom Tov? And a lot more. Let's get rolling. We are on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We are 2 lines from the top of the Amud. Tanach Rabbanan. So here, as we spoke on in the intro, we're not speaking about Yom Tov Erev Shabbos. We're not speaking about Yom Tov post Shabbos, which will be at the end of today's daf, but Yom Tov and Shabbos on the same day. Shabbos Yom Tov. Tanach Rabbanan Yom Tov Shchal Liyas b'Shabbos. Machloikes. Beishamai oimrim mispalol shmoina. Mispalol shmoina means normally the number of blessings is 7. The first 3 and the last 3 don't change. The middle 12 is removed. The middle 12 that we see on the weekday, and it's replaced with only 1. Says Beishamai, if it's Shabbos Yom Tov, you replace it with 2. 1 only for Shabbos, 1 only for Yom Tov. In other words, they don't view Shabbos Yom Tov as one kedusha. It's 2 separate things. The Omer shel Shabbos b'fnei atzma and v'shel Yom Tov b'fnei atzma. However, Beisilol Oimrim nish mispalel sheva. And in this one bracha, Maschil b'shel Shabbos, u'mishayim b'shel Shabbos, you begin speaking about Shabbos. You end speaking about Shabbos. And v'oimer kedushas hayoim in middle of the middle bracha. Rebbe, who follows the shita of Beisilol, he adds to Beisilol. And he says, you only make 7 brachas. You always begin with mentioning Shabbos. You always begin. And by the way, that's the way we do it. How do we begin the middle bracha? If it's Shabbos, we mention Shabbos first. Look inside the top of Rashi, 4 or 5 lines from the top of the Amud. The nusach of Rashi is Yom HaMenucha Zeh. I think we say Shabbos is L'Menucha. Anyway, as Yom HaMenucha Zeh and Ves Yom Chag Ploini Hazeh. So Rebbe adds back in the Gemara that you close the final words formulation of the bracha of the middle one is also Mekadesh HaShabbos Yisrael V'Hazman. I think we have a vav, right? We said Mekadesh HaShabbos V'Yisrael V'Hazman. Okay, says the Gemara Tanach Kamei Ravina that the Rebbe didn't say Mekadesh HaShabbos Yisrael V'Hazmanim, but there was another version where Rebbe added that you say Mekadesh Yisrael, then V'Hashabbos, and then V'Hazmanim. Now let's understand that the reason why Yisrael is mentioned altogether Why don't we just say Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Hazmanim, Shabbos and Yom Tov? And the answer is because it is the Jewish people, we are the ones that bring Kedusha to Yom Tov. Because without us establishing the calendar, then there would not be a Yom Tov. You wouldn't know what day of the month it is for it to be Yom Tov. So the Kiddush of the Zmanim has to do with the Yidden. Now, according to the second version, where you say Mekadesh Yisrael even before Shabbos, that would imply that the Kedusha of Shabbos is also dependent on, it comes from Yisrael, but that's a problem. So Amalei, that version cannot be correct. Otu Shabbos, as far as Shabbos is concerned, the Kedusha of Shabbos is Yisrael Mekachile. We make it holy. The seventh day is automatically the seventh day. You don't need to have a people determining when the seventh day is. For Shabbos Mekacha Mekaima, unlike Yom Tov. And therefore, it must be the first version is correct. That what did Rebbe say? He added to Beis Hillel. You also make the chasim of the bracha speaking about Shabbos and Yom Tov both. Ella Ema Mekadosh Shabbos, and then V'Yisrael v'Hazmanim. And just to explain the version, the reason why we do have one version that says Mekadesh Yisrael v'Shabbos v'Hazmanim is because Shabbos is Mekacha v'Kaima, but we add to the Kedusha of Shabbos. Okay, right. Amar Rabbi Yosef, I want you to know that Allah is like Rebbe, but which version? Uketoretz Ravina, that Shabbos, right, is mentioned dafka before Yisrael, not Mekadosh Yisrael v'Shabbos v'Hazmanim, but yes, Mekadosh Shabbos Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Says the Gemara Tanach Rabbanan, Shabbos Chaliyos b'Rosh Chodesh b'Chol Shamayit. Let's move on to Inyan, not Shabbos Yom Tov, but Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Shabbos Cholamayit. Mamash, this is what we do. So there's a big difference between Musaf and Arvis, Shachris, and Mincha. By Arvis, Shachris, and Mincha, it's Shabbos. You daven an ordinary Shabbos davening, Sheva. And not only that, not only like Beis Hillel, but we don't mention inside this the middle bracha anything about Rosh Chodesh, anything about Chol HaMoed. Taka, by Maidev, by Shachris, and by Mincha, where do we mention the Chol HaMoed or Rosh Chodesh? Yalav Yavai, we add it in Ritzei. Ritzei is part of the three final brachas. Or let's take a quick step back, the formulation of Shemona Esrei, as it was finally at the end established by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, and we were reminded of it by Shimon Hamenusi, I think, as we had in brachas, is that you begin with three of Shevach, and by the way, now we are learning this during the Aseres Yemei Tshuva. The problem of the three of Shevach was if the first three brachas have no requests in it, it needs to be explained. Why is it that during the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, Zochreinu L'chaim is something that's mentioned in the beginning? That's not a statement of praise to God, that's a request. But the formulation is you don't begin asking. First you begin praising. Then you have the middle brachas that are of requests during the week, or about the Kedusha of the day during Shabbos and Yom Tov. And then you have three final brachas that are called brachas of thanksgiving. And that's Ritzei, Moedim, and Sim Shalom. And here also it has to be explained. It doesn't sound exactly like Sim Shalom is not a bracha of requests. It sounds like it is a request. We're asking for God to place peace, and that's the biggest of requests. Classical questions that we don't have time to speak about right now. But we add Yalav Yavi not in the middle one. Where do we add it? So he says, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, whether it's Chol HaMoed, we're ba'avoida, what we call it, say. Now, v'im lo yamar, weiter machzirin oisoi, we make the person repeat. Sometimes you only have to go back to the tzei with all of the pratim. We have everything written in the Siddur today. In the English, sometimes you have to say the whole Shemona Esrei. There are many details that we're not going to go into. We learned, Chevra, that if Maidev Rosh Chodesh, not Maidev Chol HaMoed, Maidev Rosh Chodesh, if you forget Yalav Yava, you b'chlal don't have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. So there's a lot of nuances to the statement, but we're going to focus on the Nakuda, that where do you add the mention of the Yom, let's say, and Avodah. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. He does agree that it's not mentioned in the middle one. It's not mentioned in the middle one, but it's not mentioned in it's mentioned in the second to last one. The way we add ala nisim. Now, just a bekitzer, this is a theme that we learn a lot in Chassidus. There are three brachas that really speak about prayer. Shema Koilenu. Let's say the avodah should be accepted with ahava. It's also about prayer and moedim. These three brachas are connected to tefillah, but here are the words. There are different levels of prayer. Shema Koilenu refers to the deepest type of prayer. And then between Ritzei and Hoidah, Ritzei is still a prayer that's coming from Regesh, that's coming from Ahava. And Moedim is a prayer that is being uttered by someone who doesn't have Regesh, but by someone who has Mesiras Nefesh. And Hasidus always emphasizes that it's normally one or the other. Normally, the more Regesh you have, the less capacity you have to go on Mesiras Nefesh. On the other hand, when you lose your Regesh, and all we have is action, then we overcompensate by going ad Mesiras Nefesh, which is the concept of moedim. Moedim means I'm moedim. I don't feel it, I don't get it, but I'm doing it. I'm moedim to you, God. And generally, Ritzei is connected to the avodah that you didn't have during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, and Hoidah or Mesiras Nefesh is connected to Golus. Dafke because no regesh, we had more Mesiras Nefesh, which is why Chanukah and Purim, which is Yom Tovim of Mesiras Nefesh, for sure are mentioned in Hoidah. Question is, the mention of Rosh Chodesh, the mention of Yom Tovim, and they are connected somehow to the Beis Hamikdash because special korbanos were brought. So that's the question. Is it connected to the Tzei? Is it expected of us to have a regesh that it's Rosh Chodesh, a regesh that it's Chol HaMoed? Or if I care now that we know in the times of Galus, is it more connected to Hoidah? That's a very meaningful machlokes. But let's go on over here. However, says the Beitzah, Ubim Musafim, Maschil B'Shol Shabbos, Umeshayim B'Shol Shabbos. On Musaf, we do add the mention of Rosh Chodesh during the middle prayer, which is exactly what we do, right? Ata Yetzarta, for example, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and V'Omer Kedushas Hayoim Be'emtza. Says the Gemara, says the Beitzah weiter. They argue with the Tanach. Both Shitos hold that not Musaf. Arvis, Shachris, and Mincha, whether it's Hoidah or Ritzei, it's not mentioned in the middle one. But these two Tanoim hold that whenever it's only a 7 prayer, Shabbos Yontiv, then Maschil B'Shel Shabbos, Umeshayim B'Shel Shabbos, and you don't add Ayala v'Yovei by Ritzei. No, you mention Rosh Chodesh, you mention Chol HaMoed in the middle one. We don't pass in that way. But that's these two shittas. Amarafuna, indeed, ein halacha ke oisoi hazug v'ayin tois. More details. Okay, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Amar Abchia bar Ashi Amarav maniach Adam Eruvei Techumen B'Yomtiv L'Chaveroi Umasne. Here, like we mentioned in the intro, we're speaking about 2 days Yomtiv Chutz La'aretz, and the person forgot to make an Eruv Tavshilin, or a person forgot to make an Eruvei Techumen. Let's go with those who say that you may not place them. Eruv Techumen, we learned everyone is moed, you can't place an Eruv Techumen on Yomtiv. But here you didn't remember on Friday, you remembered on Thursday, that's Yom Tov. So here there's a solution. Place the Eruv Techumen and make the following stipulation. What's the following stipulation? Let's talk it out. I'm going to put my Eruv in the place that will help me go another more distance for Shabbos. I'm placing it for Shabbos. I'm doing it on Thursday. And I say like this, if today is really not Yom Tov, because Yom Tov is only 1 day, so therefore, today is Erev Yom Tov. So what I'm placing now is the Eruv Techumen. If today is Yom Tov, what I'm doing now is nothing. Don't forget, guys, on Yom Tov, you can carry food. I'm doing nothing wrong with carrying food or placing. I'm doing nothing. Then you come back tomorrow and you take the same food and you pick it up and you place it again. And you say, if yesterday was a weekday, so then it was already placed yesterday. If yesterday was Yom Tov, then today's a weekday. If today's a weekday, I'm making my Eruv Techumen today. By Eruv Tavshilin, it's similar, but not exactly the same. By Eruv Tavshilin, here's like this. If Thursday is Yom Tov, right, then Friday is not Yom Tov. Then you don't need an Eruv Tavshilin. That's the word. But what you're saying Thursday is that if really tomorrow is Yom Tov, today is Erev Yom Tov, then this is the Erev Tafshilin. Even though we learned a few daf ago that nowadays, right, we have to keep 2 days, even though we know when the 15th of the month is, it doesn't matter. But since it originated from the suffix, so we get to use the leniency of the concept of it's not Yom Arichta, it's either one day or the other day. Yes, Midrabanan, we have to keep 2 days, and it's that important. It's the end of the world, God forbid, to be mezalzel in Yom Tov Sheni, but we still view it as suffix, which allows us the stipulation. As we learned above, again, the only difference will be is that by Eruv Tchumen, you have to place it twice. And by Eruv Tafshilin, you only place it on Thursday. And you say that what? That if tomorrow is Yom Tov, this is my Eruv Tafshilin. And then on Friday, you don't have to do anything. Because if Taka Friday was Yom Tov, you already have the Eruv Tafshilin. If Thursday was Yom Tov, then Friday is Stama weekday for this. And Stama weekday out of Shabbos, you prepare food on Friday for Shabbos. You don't eat on Eruv. Says the Gemara.
Could you explain how it fits with what we just spoke earlier, that we don't do Erev Tchumen?
We don't do Erev Tchumen. Yeah. That's the beauty. We don't do Erev Tchumen on a day that's Vada Yom Tov. But here we're speaking about a 2 days Yom Tov, and this person didn't wake up on Friday. They woke up on the first day Yom Tov on Thursday. So we are allowed to view 2 days Yom Tov still as an extension of a doubt and make use of that doubt by saying, I don't know really. I really don't know. So if today is Yom Tov, then what I'm doing now is nothing. I'm not allowed to place an Erev Tchumen today. But come back tomorrow and place it tomorrow.
So the difference whether it was a 1 day Yom Tov, here's a 2 day Yom Tov.
Yes. Okay. Now, don't forget over here that it was Rav that spoke about the Eruv Tchumen, and it was Rava that spoke about the Eruv Tafshilin. Now, does one agree with the other? So it's only a one-way street. It's not a two-way street. Says the Gemara, man, the Amar Eruv Tchumen, or it's late, we got to move. If you can make a stipulation for Eruv Tchumen, then for sure, Kol Shchen Eruv Tafshilin. However, man, the Amar Tafshilin, he will hold Aver Tchumen loy. Why does it make sense to be more lenient on Eruv Tafshilin more than Eruv Tchumen? Because the lemikne shvisa b'shapsaloi. Because even though it began with a doubt, let's not forget, on the other hand, that Chazal established it as a 2 day Yom Tov. And any type of placement of Eruv is making some sort of act of acquisition, which normally may not be done for Yom Tov. So we are opening up a kula. When do we open up a leniency when it comes to food preparation? If you won't allow an Eruv Tafshilin, like the blind men from last daf, you'll be depressed, you won't have food. Not having food on Yom Tov is a much greater loss to Simchas Yom Tov than you not being able to walk beyond the Tchum. So it's not so simple.
Lost to Simchas Shabbos, not Simchas Yom Tov. Right?
I stand corrected. Correct. In other words, there's Simchas Shabbos, of the lack of Simchas Shabbos, you won't eat. Lack of Simchas Shabbos because you can't walk as far as you want. The latter is not as important. And we don't say it's a suffix. We have to be very careful. People who hear this, they say, if it's a suffix, then God forbid they can be mazalzel in Yom Tov Sheni. Okay. Let's move. Very important. Until now, we were speaking about the Yom Tov for Shabbos. What about Yom Tov to Yom Tov? Can you prepare food on Thursday for Friday when 2 days are Yom Tov? Says the Beitzah, no. The Emes Amru, that if a woman is making a preparation and she's not exerting herself more at all, she's allowed to prepare food for Thursday, on Thursday for Thursday. So she can already fill up the pot with meat, even though and she knows that the leftover meat will be for Friday, tomorrow, Yom Tov. That's not a problem. Note, you begin with the premise that you may not prepare from one day Yom Tov to the other. But here, exception number one is if the exertion that you are doing now won't be greater for tomorrow, it's the same work anyways, then you are allowed to add for tomorrow. Similarly, you're filling up a barrel of water. They used to boil water. They would knead with boiled water, even though you only need 1 keton for today, because you're not adding work. It's the same work. However, what about putting bread in the oven, taking the bread out of the oven? There, every placement and removal is an extra work. But to actually put it in the oven and then take it out when it's ready, you can only do for what you need on that day and not for the next day. And on that, Rav Shimon ben Elazar argues, and he says even that is allowed to be done. Why? You are making extra work, right, to put it in and to take it out. Like in those days, the ovens were smaller. The more packed it is, the hotter it got, or the less circulation, which was beneficial. So since having more loaves of bread makes today's bread tastier, you are allowed to fill it up, even though you know that the majority of the breads are going to be used tomorrow and not for today. And Amar Rava, we are allowed to be lenient. That halacha can Shimon ben Elazar. Basically, we have 2 exceptions, which comes on in halacha. Number 1, again, is that if the preparation of additional food is not adding to any avodah, you are allowed to do it. And number 2, even if you're doing extra work, but it's for the benefit of today's food, here also you will be allowed to do it. Listen to this inquiry. And we're going to have various very beautiful, nuanced inquiries. A person who did not leave Erev Tafshilin, is the pshat that only hu nesar, is that person prohibited baking or cooking food on Yom Tov to Shabbos? But it's not only that this person is prohibited, but the kimchoi nesar, his flour, his foods are also prohibited. Meaning, can another person use his flour? Reuven forgot to make an Erev Tafshilin. Can Shimon take Reuven's flour and make food for Reuven? If it's only an isur on the gavra, that will be our words. Reuven did not make an Erev Tafshilin, so Reuven cannot prepare food on Yom Tov for Shabbos. But if Reuven's foods are not prohibited, he cannot cook, but his neighbor can use Reuven's food for Reuven.
Right. And the neighbor he did make a Erev Tafshilin. Is that what we're saying? Shimon made one, but Reuven didn't?
The neighbor made an Erev Tafshilin, but Danny, we're not speaking about the neighbor using the neighbor's food. That's not a problem. We're speaking about, can Shimon use Reuven's flour for Reuven? And the first option is no. The kimchoi nesar. Now there will be a way around it. The way around it will be, will Reuven have to bequeath? Can Shimon acquire that flour? Then you'll be good. But will that step have to happen? Or ain't kimchoi nesar? Or no? Or Reuven didn't make an Erev Tafshilin, Reuven cannot cook for himself. But you, the neighbor, you can take Reuven's flour and make food for Reuven without having to do anything. And lamay nafkamina, la'aknuye kimchoi la'kedem. I want you to know, Bachlal, guys, making any kinyan on Yom Tov is prohibited midrabanan. We know that. We also know, we just came off Masechta Sukkah, for example, that l'tzoyrech mitzvah, a kinyan could be made. And we're going to learn more about buying food on Yom Tov for Yom Tov is allowed. Tzorech mitzvah. I'll give you the best example from Sukkah, that if I don't have the arba minim, you gift me your arba minim on Yom Tov. But that's an act of kinyan. It belonged to you, and I pick it up, and now it belongs to me. No, let's make it clear that any act of kinyan, which is normally asan midrabanan, is allowed on Yom Tov l'tzoyrech mitzvah. Eating food on Shabbos and on Yom Tov is a tzorech mitzvah. So here, if we need to, we can have this loophole. Do we need to? In other words, if the kemach of Reuven becomes asr, then an act of kinyan will have to happen. Once an act of kinyan happened, we'll be good. In other words, Shimon will own the flour. Shimon is making food for his neighbor Reuven. That's for sure not a problem. In other words, im amrat hu nasad and v'kimchei nasad, then tzarech la'aknuye kimcha la'chedim. It will be permitted, but you'll have to do that step. But the im amrat only hu nasar v'kimcha nasar, then there's no need for then loy tzarech la'aknuye kimcha la'chedim. Simply, the neighbor can take Reuven's flour and make food for the Reuven. So these are the two sides of the inquiry with the nafkamina. And now what's the din? Says the Gemara, Tashema, we're quoting a Beitzah, says, Mishlan Yecheruv Tafshilin, Hareze lo yoifa. He may not bake. Lo yavashal, he may not cook. Lo yatmin, he may not insulate. It's late. Let's leave Hatmana to Daf Chav Beis. We're almost there. And for those who learn Masechta Shabbos, for those who remember, we're going to speak about insulation, how it might be problematic. And here again, if you made an Eruv Tafshilin, you won't have an issue of insulating something on Friday for Shabbos, but this person didn't do it. He forgot. Not only v'loy loy, but also loy la'achedim. Right? That's what Danny mentioned before. In other words, for Shimon to be allowed to cook for the Uva and make it clear, forget about kinyan, no kinyan. If I didn't make an Eruv, not only may I not prepare for me, I may not prepare for you. And now what we are talking about is the next statement. If I forgot to make an Eruv, you cannot make it for me. Now, how will I have food? So clear. I have to gift my raw materials to my neighbor who did make an Eruv, and then clearly that who nesar and the kimchoy nesar indeed shmamino. Next, what happens if a person who forgot to make an Eruv tafshilin, prepared food, he baked food from Friday to Shabbos. In other words, do we say it's as I isar gavra, but the food remains permitted, or you broke this rabbinic, now the food is prohibited? So Tashema, Nachmot Mabraisa, Mishaloi, Hiniacheru Tafshilin, Keitzad Hu Oises, again we just quoted, Makne Kimchela Chedim, and then Vachedim Oifenloi, Umavashlum Loi, Baruch Hashem Daf Yud Zayin, Amid Beis. Now, the Braisa is giving you a solution. Be makna your raw material to someone else who made an Eruv. Now, Ve'im Isa, if after the fact, right, doctor, post facto, if the din will be that may be used, why didn't the Braisa also mention litnei avar va'afar muter? The Braisa is trying to give you scenarios where you have a solution. Why didn't we mention that after the fact you can eat it? The fact that it's not mentioned, infer from this that post facto you may not eat it. So the Gemara says that's not a raya. Maybe post facto you could. Why didn't the Tana mention it? Tana takanta de teiruktani and takanta isura lektani. He's not going to mention something that post facto were for sinning, and being makna kimcha is a lachatchila. Okay, so we don't have a proof. So let's go weiter. Tashema, another brayso, mishel hiniach eruv tafshilin only than areza oyif and umavashel and umatmen. And furthermore, if you want to eat your eruv on Yom Tov, then you are allowed. Now, if you ate it before you prepared the food for Shabbos, then you won't have an eruv. But you are allowed to eat it. You are allowed to eat it, but if you ate it before you finish preparing, here again, now that I don't have an eruv, I can't cook for me. I can't cook for you. And you, the neighbor, with my food, you cannot prepare for me, as we just learned above. However, even in this scenario where I have no eruv, I can be mavashal for today, for Yom Tov. And and if there's leftovers, that was the beginning of this Perek. We learned this in the Mishnah, no problem. But in this scenario, Chazal were against someone doing an act of ha'arama, of tricking the system. Sometimes we are allowed to do it. Here, we're not allowed to do it. If you remember in the first chapter, just for example, to contrast, if a person shechted an animal on Yom Tov, being that we're not allowed to be ma'abed the hides, you remember that? But there's a tremendous loss. Maybe people are going to hesitate. So remember that I can roast, I can salt meat that I'm going to roast on top of the hide. Like all these things are called haramas. Here, the Chazal were very strict, shelo yarim. And not only that, but ve'im herim, and I want to be good with God, and I'm being honest, that I really knew that I don't need all that food. I really did it for Shabbos. After the fact, it's awesome. Oh, So the raya is that if a ha'arama after the fact is asr, then baking and cooking also should be asr after the fact. And Amar Avashi again, no proof. Harama ka'amrat. It's very different. Shani harama. Listen to these words. This is such an important statement. The achmiru bar abanan tfeini mezit. There is a place to say that if a person b'mezid violated the rule and they prepared on Yom Tov for Shabbos, it's less problematic than a person who was trying to do an act of subterfuge, of ha'arama. Them in Narstu, what the Rebbe Rashab says, you're only fooling yourself. Is then a chachma, a nar, not an anar, or something like that? Don't trick, don't make tricks. The mezid is less problematic than making a trick. So again, there's no proof.
Rabbi, do these halachas apply also for a guy that cooked on Yom Tov for a yid?
Well, there's an issue of a guy cooking b'chlal, correct? Bishul akum. Let's not forget about that. I'm assuming tzamach. I have to look at this. These are dinim and Shulchan Aruch. That if I did not make an eruv tavshilin, then a guy can no way cook for me. It cannot do for me what I cannot do for me.
Assuming there was a flame that I lit before Yom Tov.
So I'm saying there's no way that a goy can do something for me that I cannot do for me. That's the whole amira la'akum issue. Well, a goy can do for me what I can do for me. I can sweep the floor. I can hire a goy to sweep the floor. Today, that the floors you can sweep. Can't have a goy working for me doing something that I cannot do. Okay. Again, so we're trying to resolve this inquiry. Homani. No, Rav Nachman Yitzchak is giving another reason why you can't prove anything from this Beitzah that's so machmer that says that if you did an act of harama, also. Because I will argue that who is the author of this Beitzah that's very chamor? Maybe it's only Hananya that follows Beishamai, Tanya, Hananya Oimer, Beishamai Oimerim, Ein Oifen Ella Imkein Eid of the Pas. A detail that we never mentioned inside, but we mentioned it in the intro, that Eid of Tavshilin really has to have from every food for every food. If you want to be able to bake, you have to designate prior to Yom Tov a baked product. Furthermore, we're going to speak about Atmana on Daf Chav Beis. If you want to be allowed to do an act of Atmana on Friday, you have to begin by doing Atmana Erev Yom Tov. In other words, every manner of food preparation has to be represented in the Eid of Tavshilin. We paskin this way. Oh. And Beis Hillel says Ma'arav b'tavshil echad, and that's enough called sarkoi. So since we see that Chananya Beishamai is more machmer, I would argue l'shita of the machmirim, there im herim asur. But we don't paskin. We can paskin like Beis Hillel. Paskin like Beis Hillel, we can be more lenient. Another reason why you can't bring a raya, so we're back to without, and the Gemara actually leaves this inquiry unresolved. Whether im afa v'bishel b'mezid, whether the isur is an isur only gavra, or whether that it extends. Oh, we're not done. Let's go weiter. So the question is still open. So says the Gemara now, Tanan, a attempted proof. Here we're quoting a Mishnah in Terumos. If a person separates tithings on Shabbos, which as we know is asur midrabanan, it's called an act of tikkun, even though it's not discernible, but nevertheless it may not be done. So now that you did it, now what? Says the Mishnah, it depends. If you separated Trumas b'shoigeg, meaning you forgot it Shabbos, or you forgot that you may not separate Trumas, then you can eat it. But if b'mezid, since you violated only a rabbinic after the fact, lo yoichal, so the same thing should be over here, l'chayra, that if you didn't have an Erev Tavshilin and you ended up cooking, should depend. B'shoigeg, yes, b'mezid not. Says the Gemara, no, loy. That the reason why over there in Truma is the Mishnah says that b'mezid lo yoichel, because you have other foods. And therefore, we have the luxury of saying you did it b'mezid, we're going to penalize you. Over here, maybe if you don't have any other ways other than cooking, then after the fact, you can eat it. Okay, so Tashima, it says, Hamat bil kelev b'Shabbos, if a person toivels kelim on Shabbos. And here again, and we're going to learn this one in the Mishnah, that's asur midrabanan. So can you use the kelim? So the Mishnah says again, b'shoigeg, you can use it. B'mezid, you can't use it. So the same thing should be over here. If you violated the rabbinic law, post facto, could you not use it? It depends. B'shoigeg or b'mezid. And again, the Gemara says not that you can't necessarily connect one with the other. Maybe the Mishnah there, tzricha. When do we have the luxury to penalize the violator, b'mezid, the islay mana achrine, because he has other utensils? Or even if you don't have other utensils, but you can borrow utensils from your neighbors. Food, people then didn't have that much food. Maybe if you don't have food, maybe even b'mezid, you'll be allowed to eat it. Weiter. Tashema, another attempted proof. This is from the Mishnah. This Mishnah is very complex, but we're going to leave it simple. That hamavashal b'Shabbos, if someone cooks on Shabbos, the shoygig yoichal, the mezid lo yoichal. If you remember, it's really a three-way machlokes tanoim. Oh, this is a sugya. That's wow. But same point. The mezid lo yoichal. Here, the Gemara doesn't even have to resort to what it said until now. Here, we can argue that even if there is no other food, don't forget cooking on Shabbos is a violation of a isur doiraisa. There, it makes a lot more sense to be machmer. Says the Gemara b'chalal, you can't compare one case to the other. Isur de Shabbos shani. Here, Isur de Shabbos meaning it's a biblical violation, and noch Shabbos Isur skila. Here, we're speaking about a rabbinic violation, and yes, correct. This is a boya that is a boya deloy ifshata. Whether after the fact you can benefit from that food or not. Let's go weiter. We had in the Mishnah how much cooked items do you need to do? Beishamai oimnim shnei tafshilin. Beis Hillel says one tafshil. Says the Gemara Nachamal. This is, I think, the third time that we have this in this Masechta, that in the Mishnah machlokes Beishamai and Beis Hillel, and we have an Abshimon ben Elazar that had another version of their machlokes. So Masnis and the Haitana, the Tanya Amrishman ben Elazar. I want you to know that Moedim Beishamai and Beis Hillel al shnei tafshilin, that you need to have two tafshilin. Where is their machlokes regarding the detail that the Mishnah gave, that someone prepared dago beitzah sha'alav, you broiled a fish in eggs? Do we view this like two tafshilin? That beishamai oimrim, they're machmed here, and they say since you need to have two tafshilin, and now that you mix the fish is fried in the egg, it's considered one tafshil. And Beis Hillel oimrim, that what? When they said the words tafshil echad, what they really meant is that what we call one tafshil, halachically is two tafshilin. So you can use it. But everyone agrees that you don't have to have lechatchila two tafshilin. And now v'shavin, another detail, it's not that you broiled the fish in the egg, but if you mashed up a egg and you put it inside the fish, that l'kula or sherisek kaflutois, if you minced vegetables and you place it inside the fish, you stuffed it, tzemach to cook, that's shnei tafshilin. And therefore, even Beis Shammai will be moided that this is enough. But the point is, faket l'chumra, that his version is that Beis Hillel holds you need to have two tafshilin.
Rabbi, are we not using the version that we learned before that Beis Shammai requires one type of food for every type of thing that you're able to, like bread for bread or cook for cook?
In other words, this B'rai says even for cooked dishes, you have to have two cooked dishes. And according to his version, if Beis Hillel says it, that would have been the halacha. However, Amar Rava, that the halacha follows our Tana's version like Beis Hillel. It's very important that for cooked dishes, you need to have only one cooked food. Now let's go back. We did have a machla, right? We did have another Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So when we read these words, you would think for paskening like Beis Hillel, then one cook should be good for baking also. So look inside the third Tosfos. That Amar Rav Hilchas Ketana Kama V'Alibah Beis Hillel, Peirush Rashi V'Alibah Beis Hillel the Kommentav Shalecha. For Amar Rabbeinu Tam, that this is only for this topic, but for the prior topic, the la'afiyah, guys, we paskin like this, Rabbeinu Tam. Tzorech la'aref gam bepas. Ve'enu yochel la'efois al eruv tafshil. Oh, you only have to have one tafshil. But we do paskin, tafshil is for cooked. For baking, you have to have, and that's what we do is we take a tafshil and we take baked, challah or matzah, I don't care, baked, and now we have a proper eruv tafshilin. Let's go by.
If you wanted to go according to everyone, you would do 2 tavshilin and then 2 baked goods, and then you would cover Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel on all of them.
What Danny's saying is, according to Beis Shammai, number one, you have to have for baked. Since he says 2 tavshilin, he's saying you need to have 2 baked items, probably. Okay. Says they go. Let's go weiter. What did we learn in the Mishnah? Referring back to the Mishnah, if your eruv that you set aside was eaten, or if it was lost, so then the Mishnah says, you can't use it for the eruv tavshilin. So Amar Rabbi, and we keep on emphasizing, that means that even if you began to prepare, if you didn't finish preparing, you're not good. There is one exception. Amar Rabbi, Naktinan, we have the following Kabbalah, that if you began preparing a dough, and while you began, you had the eruv, and now the nechal eruva, even before the item is finalized by bread, we can be lenient. Here we can be goymer. And by the way, goymer, only that loaf of bread. But there's a certain leniency that we made for bread, l'chu'ura, connected to what we learned above, that the more important it is, the more we can be lenient. And we're speaking about the most staple of foods. Imagine a Yid won't even have bread. So for that, if he began, we don't say that you have to first finish and then eat. Even if you began, it's good enough. Let's start learning the new Mishnah. So what did we have? It's beautiful. We learned Yom Tov Erev Shabbos. Then we learned Yom Tov on Shabbos. Then we learned 2 days Yom Tov before Shabbos. And now we're introducing something new. What happens if Yom Tov is after Shabbos? Now, you're not going to bake on Shabbos for Yom Tov. You can't bake on Shabbos, period. But there are other actions that one might do on Shabbos, which will be for the benefit of Yom Tov. Here also, we want to know whether there is an issue, whether it is a non-issue. So says the Mishnah. Chal liyois achar Shabbos. We're learning the Masechtas Yom Tov. So we're speaking about Yom Tov. Chal liyos means if Yom Tov falls out on achar Shabbos, which is what we call Sunday, Yom Rishon LaShabbos, Beis Shammai Yoimrim, Matbilen es hakoil melifnei HaShabbos. If you have things that have to be toivled, both kalim, if you have kalim that are tamei, and people. Now, a person is not necessarily if the person is tamei, but here's we will introduce the concept that Rashi says that the chayiv. I'm looking inside the first line in Rashi under the Gemara that chayiv l'tayir es atzmai beregel. There's an inyan of going to the mikveh before Yom Tov. So normally you would go out of Yom Tov, but now it's Shabbos. Says Beis Shammai, you may not go to the mikvah on Shabbos. It has to be melifnei Shabbos. Melifnei Shabbos. Now look inside the Rashi, 3 lines under the Gemara, very important Rashi. L'shitas Beis Shammai, the asir lahatvil b'Shabbos u'b'Yom Tov. Beis Shammai holds that one may not go to the mikvah, not on Shabbos, not on Yom Tov. We don't paskin like Beis Shammai, but that's just to be aware that there's such a sheet. However, back in the Mishnah, Beis Hillel loimrim kalim milifnei Shabbos. You're right. If you have a keli that you want to make tahar for Yom Tov, you can't do that on Shabbos. You have to do it before Shabbos. But v'adam, a person is allowed to go to the mikvah on Shabbos. And like Rashi says, we're learning the Gemara, what's the difference between kalim and adam? Now let's learn another thing. V'shavin shamashkin es hamayim b'chli even l'tahara. On Shabbos, you can do the only food/drink that is tamei, that is able to become tahar by taking it to the mikvah, only is water. Because normally if food is tamei, it's tamei. Doesn't mean that all food that's tamei is unusable, but it's going to remain tamei. Liquids that become tamei remain tamei. The only exception is mayim. If you have water that became tamei, there is a way to make it tahar. How do you do that? You fill up water in a cup. You put the cup inside the mikvah. We're speaking about mikvahs whose waters were not potable or drinkable. So you don't want the waters to mix. But the moment you put it down into the water, and the waters that are around the cup of the mikvah, they touch hashaka, they kiss the waters that are in the keli, it's considered as if it's merged. Sometimes we have the word zriya. It's as if these waters were planted in the mikvah, and these waters become tahar. Says the Mishnah that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if you want to purify waters for Sunday, Yom Tiv, you are allowed to do that on Shabbos. Now, by the way, he mentions clay Evan. That's a practical thing because stone utensils cannot become tummy. So what will be the other option of you putting the water in a, let's say, in a earthenware utensil? And I take that back. Earthenware utensil also cannot be clay cheres cannot become tar. But you have a wooden utensil. You want to, if the wooden utensil is tar, you can also do it. But what happens if your utensil is tummy? And since you are told right now that you can be metaher mayim, a person is going to say, you know what? I might as well chapanayin and bring tara to my keli. I'm going to put tummy water in a tummy keli. I'm going to toivel, do hashaka, yechap with the water, and now the keli will become tar. That you're not allowed to do. Oh, says the Mishnah that aboloi matbilin, you may not toivel tummy water. The Gemara will explain in a tummy keli through it being metayer the keli. You cannot be metayer the keli on Shabbos. You can only be metayer mayim. Make sure the mayim is in a keli that's not tummy. And now the Mishnah concludes by making two statements that will leave for the Gemara. Just read the words that umadbilen migav legav. You can toivel a keli from one purpose to the other. We'll leave that for the Gemara. And umechabura lechabura from one group to the other. The Mishnah began with the rule, even lebeis Hillel, that allows for a person to go to the mikvah on Shabbos and on Yom Tiv, but everyone agrees the kula alma mia that a keli b'Shabbos loy. You may not immerse a keli on Shabbos. Why? Now people are going to say why? Because you're being misaken it. Let's at least I want to just open up. So says the Gemara Amar Rabba. These are the Shas Sugyas. Says Rabba Gezeda, turning to Daf Yud Ches, that if a person will be allowed to be metaher kelim on Shabbos, Shema yitlenu biyadoi v'yavirenu arba amos b'reshus harabim. That if the mikveh is not in your domain, on the way to the mikveh, you're going to end up carrying it. And remember, we already quoted this above. Just quickly look inside the top Tosfos. Like, why are we saying that we are afraid that you're going to transport something dalad amos b'reshus harabim? This kasha is always why didn't Rabba say that we are afraid that you're going to carry it from a reshus hayacha to a reshus harabim? You're going to carry it from your house to the street to the mikvah. Top Tosfos. Shama yavrenu arba reshus harabim. Tema ma'iloi kamar shama yoytzienu reshus harabim. Maybe do it so. Yeshloimar sheyesh akeda bepetach. That we're not afraid that you're going to forget to carry something out of your house. People know, don't walk out of your house with stuff. But if you are in the street and there's no physical boundary, you don't know where the Dalad Amos ends. If you will be allowed to toivel it, there was a fear that you might end up transporting Arba Amos b'Reshus Harabim. We'll leave it over here. And God willing, to be continued. Well, at some point this week, I want to learn 2 daf before Yom Kippur, which will allow us to only have to learn 1 daf Friday morning, which will be a lot easier than after Yom Kippur getting up at, I don't know, 4:30. On Yom Kippur, yeah, we're not going to be recording.